I am 77 years old, and I have spent the better part of my life believing a very quiet, very dangerous lie about how the human body ages. I sit here in my study in Franklin, Tennessee most mornings before the sun comes up. I have a worn leather armchair that is practically molded to the shape of my back over the years. This is where I drink my morning tea, and this is where I do my reading. A few weeks ago, I was looking over some notes from a routine doctor visit. My doctor is a good man. He checks my vitals, he looks at my cholesterol, he asks if I have any new aches or pains, and then he sends me on my way. But as I sat in the quiet of my home looking out the window at the frost on the lawn, I realized what doctors rarely say to people our age. They tell us what to do once a disease has already arrived. They almost never talk about the silent, microscopic battles happening inside our cells decades before a diagnosis is ever written on a clipboard. My father was a man of few words who worked hard his entire life in Ohio. He had a philosophy about health that was very common for his generation. He believed you simply ignored the check engine light until the engine actually started smoking. He worked through the pain, he waved away fatigue, and he assumed that getting older just meant accepting a slow, inevitable decline. For a long time, I carried that same assumption. I spent my career in educational publishing. I was good at organizing information for other people, but I was completely illiterate when it came to the signals my own body was sending me. That changed completely when my wife Eleanor faced a health crisis some years ago. I will not share her private medical details, but I will tell you that the hours I spent sitting in cold waiting rooms changed the way I look at everything. It was during that time I realized that some damage happens silently until one day it does not anymore. The body warns before it exacts its toll, and most people realize too late what had been warning them for years. That realization sent me looking for answers. I started reading medical journals with a pencil in my hand, trying to understand what actually happens at the cellular level as we pass our 60th and 70th birthdays. I assumed I would be reading about genetics. I assumed I would find out that our health is mostly a lottery ticket printed with our family history. But what I found buried in the research completely dismantled everything I thought I knew. I learned that right now in my body and in yours, there are cells making mistakes. In my publishing days, I understood the concept of a copying error. If you run a printing press long enough, eventually a page will misprint, a word will blur, a paragraph will get cut off. Our bodies are running a biological printing press every single minute, constantly dividing cells to replace old ones. I read a paper explaining that during this massive copying process, mistakes happen. These mistakes create abnormal cells. And some of those abnormal cells are the very beginning stages of something dangerous. When I first read that, I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I thought, if we all have these abnormal copying errors happening right now, why are we not all severely ill? I spent days trying to understand this. I filled a whole notebook with thoughts about our immune system. I learned that we have a biological security patrol constantly circulating, looking for these mistakes and clearing them out. But the piece of information that forced me to put my pencil down and just stare at the wall was understanding what happens to the cells that manage to hide from the patrol. I found an analysis explaining that a dangerous cluster of cells, even if it survives, cannot hurt you on its own. It is microscopic. It is harmless. It can sit there for decades doing absolutely nothing because it is missing one crucial thing. It has no supply line. It has no access to your bloodstream. Without a supply line, it cannot get oxygen, and it cannot get nutrients. It remains smaller than the tip of the pencil I was holding in my hand. Then I found a word I had never seen before, angiogenesis. I had to look it up in a medical dictionary. It simply means the creation of new blood vessels. The research I was reading explained that our bodies tightly control how blood vessels grow. We need them to heal wounds, but we do not want them growing wildly where they do not belong. The danger, I learned, is that abnormal cells can essentially hijack this system. They release a chemical signal that acts like fertilizer, demanding that the body build a new blood vessel directly into the abnormal cluster. I read a study from a prominent medical school in Massachusetts that used advanced imaging to watch this happen. The researchers observed that once a blood vessel connects to that tiny, harmless cluster, everything changes. With a supply of blood, the growth rate explodes. A cluster the size of a grain of sand can multiply its size thousands of times over in just a matter of weeks. Before I tell you what I discovered next about how we can actually intervene in this process, I want to mention something I have noticed. I see messages and comments from people who spend this time with me, who listen to these stories, but who have not actually subscribed to the channel. If these conversations resonate with you, if you find yourself thinking about these things during your own quiet mornings, could you take a moment to see if you are subscribed? It costs nothing at all, but it helps this community grow, and it allows these observations to reach other people who might be looking for the same kind of understanding we are building here. When I understood how crucial that blood supply line was, I thought the only answer must be heavy pharmaceutical intervention. I knew there were powerful drugs designed specifically to block these blood vessels from growing. But as I kept reading through the clinical literature, I found an experiment that completely shifted my perspective. Scientists were testing different compounds in a laboratory to see what could effectively stop abnormal blood vessels from forming. They did not just test medications, they tested extracts from ordinary foods. The results I read were so staggering that if the researchers had not known they were looking at a plant, they would have assumed they were looking at a newly developed synthetic drug. I learned that there are over 100 different foods that contain natural compounds capable of interfering with those chemical signals. They can literally slow or stop the supply lines from being built. That was my first major discovery. The second mechanism I uncovered was equally profound. It had to do with how our bodies handle the daily wear and tear on our biology. Every time we step out into the sun, every time we encounter environmental stress, our cellular blueprint takes a tiny hit. I thought about the roads back in Ohio. After a harsh winter, the asphalt is full of potholes. If the city sends out a maintenance crew with plenty of fresh asphalt and good tools, the road gets patched immediately and traffic flows smoothly. But if the crew has no materials, the potholes grow, the road crumbles, and eventually the street is ruined. I learned that our cells have their own maintenance crews. They are constantly trying to patch the daily damage. But they cannot do their job if we do not provide the raw materials. I realized I had spent years of my life expecting my body to repair itself while I fed it meals that offered absolutely no biological building blocks. The most shocking example I found involved a fruit I rarely ever put in my grocery cart, the kiwi. I always thought of it as just a tropical garnish, something you might see on a fruit tart. But I found a study conducted at a university in Norway that made me look at it completely differently. The researchers took a group of adults and asked them to eat 1, 2, or 3 kiwis every day for a few weeks. Then they looked at their cells under a microscope using a specific test that actually lets you see broken pieces of DNA. They looked like little comets with tails. The results showed that the people eating just 1 kiwi a day had drastically less damage. But the people eating 3 kiwis a day showed something that felt almost miraculous to me. They were not just preventing new damage. Their cells were actively repairing the old damage. The combination of vitamin C and a host of other compounds in the fruit was giving the cellular maintenance crew exactly the asphalt they needed to fix the road. I read that and immediately added kiwis to my weekly shopping list. The third area of research that pulled me in was the connection between our immune system and the bacteria living in our digestive tract. We always hear about gut health in passing, but I never understood the gravity of it until I read an analysis from a cancer research center in France. They were looking at a powerful medical treatment that relies on the immune system. For some patients, the treatment was a miracle. For others, it did absolutely nothing. The researchers wanted to know why. When they looked closely, they found that the successful patients all had high levels of one specific type of bacteria in their gut. It is called Akkermansia. I practiced saying that name out loud a few times sitting in my chair. The patients who lacked this bacteria simply could not mount a proper immune response. Their internal elite forces were essentially asleep. The bacteria was acting as a communication bridge, telling the immune system to wake up and pay attention. When I laid all these notes out on my desk, I felt a profound sense of agency. I realized I did not have to be a passive bystander in my own aging process. I could not change my genetics, and I certainly could not undo the decades I spent ignoring my health. But I could change the environment inside my body, starting with my next meal. I am telling you this because I wish someone had told me sooner. You do not need fear. You need attention. I decided to stop thinking about diets as a form of restriction or punishment. I realized that restrictive diets where you vow to never eat a piece of bread again almost never work. They just make you miserable. Instead, I adopted what I call an additive approach. I focused entirely on adding protective foods into my daily routine. I found that when you actively add good things, they naturally start to crowd out the things that do not serve you. I want to share the specific routine I built for myself based on what I observed in the literature. I started with the kiwis. I buy them every week now. For general maintenance, I try to eat at least one a day. The research suggested that eating up to 3 gives the maximum repair benefit. I learned that if you wash them well, you can actually eat the skin, which holds extra nutrients. I admit the fuzzy texture was strange at first, but I got used to it. Sometimes I buy the golden kiwis, which have a smooth skin and are much easier to eat whole. I just slice them up and eat them with my morning routine. Then I had to reconsider my afternoon coffee. I have always loved a warm cup of coffee in the mid-afternoon, but my reading pushed me to look closely at authentic brewed green tea. I learned about a compound in it called EGCG, which is incredibly effective at blocking those abnormal blood vessel supply lines we talked about. I read an analysis following tens of thousands of women over 10 years, showing that those who drank brewed green tea daily had significantly better long-term health outcomes. So I learned how to brew it properly. You cannot just boil water and throw a bag in. Boiling water destroys the delicate compounds. I heat the water until it is steaming but not boiling, let it steep for a few minutes, and then I add a squeeze of fresh lemon juice. I read that the vitamin C in the lemon actually stabilizes the compounds in the tea, so your body can absorb them much more effectively. I never add milk because the dairy proteins bind to the good compounds and render them useless. Next, I looked at blueberries. My grandson loves blueberries, but usually only when they are baked into muffins with plenty of sugar. I had to learn to appreciate them fresh. I found a study involving athletes where researchers measured the specific immune cells circulating in their blood before and after eating a daily cup of blueberries. The results showed a massive increase in the natural killer cells, the elite guards of the immune system. The deep blue pigment in the skin of the berry is what does the work. I learned that consistency is what matters most. Eating a massive bowl of berries once a month does very little. Eating a small handful every single day provides a steady, constant fuel for the immune system. I keep a bag of frozen blueberries in the freezer because they are often frozen at the peak of ripeness, and I eat a cup of them daily. The fourth food I had to wrap my mind around was soy. As a man born in the late 1940s, the idea of eating tofu or edamame was entirely outside my comfort zone. Worse than that, I had heard all the rumors that soy contained plant estrogens that would disrupt my hormones. My daughter Rebecca, who is a dietitian, sat me down one afternoon and patiently explained that I had it all backwards. She pointed me to research showing that the plant compounds in soy look completely different from human hormones at a molecular level. In fact, they act as a protective block. Beyond that, I read that a specific compound in soy is one of the most potent natural inhibitors of blood vessel growth ever tested. It essentially cuts the communication line between an abnormal cell and the blood supply it desperately wants. I started slowly. I learned to add a little edamame to a salad or eat a small piece of tofu a couple of times a week. Broccoli was the fifth food on my list. Eleanor has always served steamed broccoli with dinner, so I thought I was already doing well. But the notes I took revealed a crucial detail I had missed. The mature crowns of broccoli are good, but the tiny 3-day-old sprouts are mathematically superior. They contain a compound called sulforaphane, that acts as a master switch for the body's detoxification system. I found a measurement showing that a tiny pinch of these fresh sprouts contains 100 times more of this compound than a massive plate of mature broccoli. I started looking for them in the produce aisle right next to the alfalfa sprouts. When I cannot find them, I make sure to eat the thick stems of the regular broccoli, not just the florets, because the stems hold more of the beneficial compounds. And I learned never to boil them. Boiling destroys the compound. A quick, light steam is all they need. The sixth change I made brought a lot of joy to our kitchen. It involves tomatoes. I have always loved the smell of tomatoes simmering on the stove for a Sunday dinner. I was thrilled to learn that a compound in tomatoes called lycopene is a powerful protector of cellular health. But the most fascinating part is that eating a raw tomato only gives you a fraction of the benefit. When you cook the tomatoes, when you simmer them down into a sauce or a paste, the heat physically breaks down the tough cell walls of the plant. This releases the lycopene in a form that our bodies can actually absorb and use. I read a massive observation spanning 12 years showing that men who ate cooked tomato products several times a week had a measurable layer of protection against cellular issues. Now, when we cook tomatoes, we always add a generous pour of good olive oil, because the protective compound needs a healthy fat to carry it into the bloodstream. The final piece of the puzzle was the pomegranate. This brought me back to that French study about the gut bacteria, the Akkermansia. I learned that pomegranates contain specific compounds that travel down into the digestive tract and serve as the perfect food for that exact strain of bacteria. By consuming pomegranate, you are quite literally farming the bacteria that commands your immune system to pay attention. I do not have the patience to pick the seeds out of a fresh pomegranate every day, so I found a high-quality pure juice with no added sugar. I pour just a few ounces into a glass and drink it in the afternoon. It is tart and sharp, but I drink it knowing exactly what it is doing inside me. As I integrated these foods into my life, I realized that timing matters almost as much as the food itself. I learned that our cellular repair crews do their best work while we are sleeping. If we eat a heavy meal right before bed, the body has to divert all its energy to digestion, leaving the repair crews understaffed. So I started eating my kiwi and my berries earlier in the day, and I make sure the kitchen is closed long before I turn off the lights. I also stopped looking for shortcuts. I used to think I could just buy a bottle of vitamin pills and get the same results. But my reading convinced me otherwise. A whole tomato contains dozens of compounds that interact with each other in ways science is still trying to map out. A pill only gives you one isolated piece. The whole food is always more intelligent than the supplement. I sit in my chair now and I look at my notebooks with a sense of deep, quiet relief. I do not worry about being perfect. If Eleanor bakes a pie on a Sunday, I eat a slice and I enjoy every single bite of it. I know that because I am consistently giving my body the building blocks it needs on Monday through Saturday, my internal defense systems are robust enough to handle a piece of pie. Aging well starts with what you stop ignoring. We cannot stop the clock. We cannot prevent every copying error in our biology. But we can absolutely refuse to provide the fertilizer those errors need to grow. When my grandchildren come over now, I do not just watch them from the porch. I get down on the grass with them. I feel a sustained energy that I honestly thought I had lost a decade ago. It is not magic. It is just biology functioning the way it was designed to function when given the right materials. If you have been feeling like your health is entirely out of your hands, I hope you will look closely at what you are putting on your plate. You have more control over your internal environment than you have ever been led to believe. The systems to protect you are already inside you right now. They are just waiting for the supply lines to open.